panelists will be talking about landlessness in the Tarai Madhes. Talak's done research on this topic on and off for several years. एक हप्ता आजको एक हप्तापछि चाहिँ तारामणि सापकोटाले चाहिँ आम सञ्चार र समावेशी पत्रकारिता भनेर he just written a book in Nepali on this topic. यो चाहिँ social, you could say the title would be something like social inclusion in Nepali journalism. 16th ko there are some details missing, so we haven't advertised that yet. On the 21st of April, 2 weeks from today, our friend Mike will be talking about Dalit literature in India and Nepal, the question of authorial authority. The 23rd April ma chai बाल बालिकाको पठन संस्कृति भनेर A-level student and a teacher who is also, sorry, not a teacher, writer who works on children's literature will be speaking. Her name is Manju Gewali and the student is Anusri Avasti. If you live in Kathmandu and would like to follow us, our seminars get information. We don't send emails about seminars anymore. We stopped doing that a number of years ago. But that information is now available on Martin Chautari's website under events or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram Instagram, and whatever other social media platforms that exist. Okay. Okay. So the next item in our agenda is our tradition of going around the room and introducing ourselves. My name is Pratiswarta. I've worked here forever. And it's your turn now.
I'm Narendra Guru from Milan as a tea farmer.
Hello, I'm Kiranti from Italy, but now teaching in Canada.
So, सबैजनालाई नमस्कार. म यो यात्रा
Okay, so I continue. Namaskar, I'm Marian Gaenszle. I'm currently in Hyderabad.
Hi, I'm Doji Guru. I'm a writer, educator.
Namaste, म भिमराई मानवशास्त्र विद्यार्थी।
नमस्कार, म माला राई। म जेन्डर स्टडिजमा अध्यापक गर्छु।
नमस्ते, म अमित, म विद्यार्थी।
नमस्ते, म इन्डिया श्रेष्ठ अनि म अहिले हाइड्रोमा रिसर्च
नमस्कार, म मणिराज गुरुङ। म चाहिँ म पनि अहिले लेख्ने सम्पादन गर्ने काम गर्छु।
नमस्ते, मेरो नाम चाहिँ निशा गुरुङ, म स्टुडेन्ट हो।
नमस्ते, म सुजिन लोरु, सङ्घसभा मानवशास्त्र विद्यार्थी।
म सञ्जिला मोक्तान, मार्टिन चौतारी।
म रुख गुरुङ, म यहीँ काम गर्छु।
नमस्ते, म अर्जुन गुरुङ।
नमस्ते, म समीर केसी इन्डिया मार्टिन चौतारी।
नमस्ते, सेवा हो, म डिडिएम हो।
सेवालो म मुन्डुलेको
म बेलुका प्रतिनिधिका
मेरो नाम सुमन छ।
I'm Linda, Martin Srimati.
So thank you all. It's a great honor to be introducing today's speaker, Dr. Martin Gaenszle. I'm pretty sure I met Martin for the first time in 1992 when he was the representative of the South Asia Institute in Kathmandu. At that time, he used to organize seminars at the Gothe Institute, the old one in Kitapuri. And I remember attending one or two of those or more during 92, which was the year I came back to actually begin my PhD research. And then we've had many opportunities to have discussions and learn from Martin's work. Martin often Martin Gaenszle first came to do his serious research on Nepal 40 years ago in 84-85. That was part of his doctoral research, which was completed at the University of Heidelberg in 89. And the dissertation got published first in German in 91, and then got translated. He translated into English and got published. This got published in the year 2000 as Origins and Migrations, Kinship, Mythology and Ethnic Identity among the Mewahangai of East Nepal. This book was put out by Mandala Book Point in Kathmandu in the year 2000. Was this originally written in
No, that was originally also written in
German.
English,
English?
but published in Germany.
Okay. Then the second book was Ancestral Voices, Oral Ritual Texts and Their Social Context Among the Meoangrai of East Nepal. This was originally published in Germany in 2002, but then was republished here by Social Science Bar and Himal Books in 2021. Apart from the research he's been doing in East Nepal for 40 years, Martin also did research on Banaras in the early 2000s. Then he put together with a colleague this book called Visualizing Space in Banaras, Images, Maps, and the Practice of Representation. This came out in 2006, but on the Banaras work is published in various forums, including our journal here, Sinas. He wrote an article in Sinas on Nepal's various connections with Banaras over the last 200 plus years. But then, apart from here, he's published his Banaras material in other edited volumes, and so forth. Then the late Richard Burgard, some of us never got a chance to meet with him, but Richard completed a dissertation at SOAS in 1978, and it was issued almost 40 years later in 2016 by Social Science Bar. That's this fat book, The History of Janakpur Dam, which again Martin edited that dissertation and wrote a very long and important introduction to it. As you can tell, he's a bilingual writer, German Bhasama, raw English, but he speaks at least 4 languages, maybe 5 or more. 4? Kotota Thai language. That's not one person. As I said, when I first met him, he was the Kathmandu office co-head of the South Asia Institute of the Heidelberg University. Roughly around 94, he went back to Germany and taught there in Heidelberg for several years. In 2007, he assumed the position of a professor at the University of Vienna, Austria, from which he retired 2 years ago. And currently, he's just finished a fellowship in Delhi at the ICAS MP International Center for Advanced Studies. So he actually comes to Kathmandu from Delhi. Personally, we had an opportunity when Mike Hutt and I put together this book, Political Change and Public Culture in Post-1990 Nepal. Martin had a chapter on the film Numafung in that volume. And personally, when he was here as the Kathmandu office head, he did an important interview with the late Mahesh Chandra Legmi that was published in the European Bulletin of Himalayan Research, which I have used as an archive. I've used the interview as an archive to write stuff about Legmi in various places. So after all that introduction, I now invite Martin to talk about the Satyahangma Panth, reform movement and ethnic religion in East Nepal. I should point out that there are several people in the room who are now doing research in East Nepal, or you could say even greater East Nepal, which includes territories of India. I don't think there's anybody from the embassy here. So, so that's why this talk is updated. So, Martin, please start.
So, thank you very much, Satish, for this very kind, expansive introduction. Yes, I think I will come straight to my topic, but let me just say a few words about background. As you have heard, I've been mainly working on the Rai community, but I see more as studying Kiranti matters in the Kiranti culture and literature. And so therefore I have moved a little bit in recent years from the Rai areas a bit further east to the Limbu area, and also beyond the border, as you just indicated. I also have now looked at this Kiranti culture on the Indian side, Darjeeling and in Sikkim. So also, as you just mentioned, this fellowship I was benefiting from in Delhi is also a background to this work because it gave me an opportunity to focus on this aspect of my research, which has been accompanying me for quite some years, I have to say. But I haven't really published a book about it, and that's actually what I'm planning to do. That was the intention also in Delhi to get a bit more feedback for the theoretical framing of the work on Padunanda and the Satyahangma movement, which actually I started looking at when I was here together with Nodal Kishore Rai and Vishnu Singh Rai working on language documentation in the Eastern Hills, and I came across the importance of this movement. So that's just to stress that this paper I'm preparing here is meant as an introduction to the book which I'm working on. And so it has the intention to give the whole research a bit of more broader perspective in theoretical terms, but also in geographical terms, because I realize that many of the aspects of this research on the Satyahangma movement resonates with other movements in the whole subcontinent, not only in Nepal or the Himalayas. So this book is about the emergence of a new, what I would call ethnic religion in the region of Eastern Nepal, which is known as the Satyahangma Panth, and came into being in the 1920s at the time of Rana autocratic rule. It was originally initiated and led by one man, and that is Padunanda Lingen, and this is the major figure I'm talking about today, but also the impact he had on the history of Eastern Nepal. So I think many of you have seen this picture. Actually, it's based on the central photograph, which is almost the only photograph, but I'll show you another one as well. This is endlessly reproduced in books and journals, so we don't really have many more sources about how he looked, but in this way he's very much present among his followers, and you see there's a lot of creativity flowing in how it's been depicted. So he was a charismatic guru, and today is worshipped as a kind of ethnic culture hero. New creed he propagated can be described as a reformed version of the Limbus indigenous or tribal Buddhist religion based on the Mundum oral tradition. It has become popular not only among Hindu but also among the other Kiranti ethnic groups, and so today this can be seen as a modern version of Kiranti religion. That's exactly also how it's depicted by certain groups, but this is also something which one has to, of course, see critically. Let me just come to the concept of Kiranti religion, because that's at the background. If you look at the census, you see and you will know that actually Kirat, since 1991, is a category of religion, of a dharma in the census, and according to this recent data, it has actually grown a little bit to 3.2%, which comes to about almost 1 million in the contemporary, in the present context. So, of course, this is important because before the other census data always classified the Kirat people as Hindus, because when census papers came, they just looked and asked them, do you worship Shiva and Vishnu? And people just said yes, and so they classed as Hindus, but eventually, and more in the course of time, people in the East saw themselves as followers of a Kiranti religion. But now the question is, what is Kiranti religion? And there is a lot of debate about this going on. So this is what this paper is also about. But of course, I have to stress at this point that there's no consensus about this. The followers, the present successors of Padunanda, claim to represent the Kirat Dharma, but of course it's only one section of the Kirati as a whole, and there are various versions of what actually Kirat Dharma can actually mean. So this is only focusing on the Satyahangma movement, and so I just want to stress that this is the larger context of what it's all about. So my book project is about a religious movement, a story of changing popular beliefs, and especially of reform of ritual practices. So that's why I kept the title also ethnic religion and also religious movement, because it is about revising practices, but sanitizing religion in terms of introducing new forms of worship, but especially having new norms like giving up blood sacrifice and drinking alcohol, which is one of the main important things which Satyahangma followers preach. So this is one of the questions I want to pose today. What is it really? Is it a new religion, or is it rather a religious movement, something which is very much in process? So that's the question I will come back at the end. First, let me introduce you to this phenomenon, because not everyone will know about Raghunath. Actually, I think here in Nepal, that's the difference from being in Delhi, where I gave this paper last year. You will know that actually Mahaguru Raghunath is one of the Rashtriya Vibhutis. He's a national luminary. That's an official title. There was a decision by the government cabinet on that in 2009, and significantly the 16th is Mahaguru Raghunath. In this line, it is rather prestigious line, you could say, starting from King Janak, Gautam Buddha, and including, of course, many kings. Also, one woman, Pasang Lamu Sherpa, was also added shortly before Raghunath, but he's, in a way, you could say, he's the representative, along with Pasang Lamu Sherpa, of the Janajati part of the population. So the question, of course, in my book project is who is this person? Historically, what do we know about him? What actually happened in the 1920s and 30s when he was actively roaming around in the eastern part of Nepal? Most of you will know that he, in a way, introduced his reforms, which are already indicated, ban on blood sacrifice and alcohol. So in a way, he was a modernizer, you could say. He also actually spread literacy by spreading the Kiranti script and introducing a kind of written tradition. So that's the kind of program he had in short. But the book which I'm putting together is also not only about Raghunath, that would be important part, but it's also about the movement in the time after his death. It was 1949, just at the end of the Rana times. The movement almost seemed to disappear, and there wasn't, when I started on this, there was hardly anything in the English academic literature about this movement, apart from saying that this movement somehow was there but eventually dwindled. And almost disappeared, but this is not the case, because at least since the 1970s and especially since the 1990s, there is a successor who claims to be his successor, Atmananda Lingden, from the same plant in East Nepal, who is now, and I'll come to that in more detail, claiming to be the spiritual leader of this Kirat Dharma. But there had also been other claimants. There was one Jyotinanda, a Rai actually, who also could have, I'm not sure whether he actually did claim, but he was also seen by many as a reincarnation of Raghunath. And there's another third one, Omnanda, who also at some stage at least claimed to be a reincarnation, but that's another story. He went into a different direction. So you can see that this new religion which came up in this movement is not very homogeneous, and that's part of my presentation here to show that it actually has some divisions, and that unity played an important role, but actually what happened was obviously rather the opposite of that. So, as I already said, my intention here is to kind of present the major features of this movement and also put it into a broader perspective by comparing with other movements in the South Asian subcontinent. So my first part now, and I think I forgot to move to the second image. Many of you will know this is Atmananda Lingden, the person who now leads the Satyahangma movement, actually calling it Kiranti Dharma, printing these red books, the Bundu books, brought out in Larumba in East Nepal, north of Damak, and he's, as I said, the main representative, but not uncontroversial. So let me focus now on Pragnanda and the historical person. I will just stress that he's really a kind of typical guru in a way that you can compare him with other gurus. He's called the Mahaguru, whereas Atmananda Lingden is called the Dharma Guru. So there's a distinction there, but otherwise they are seen in a direct line. He was a genuine religious person, and I would say he was a rather charismatic person, as he had a large following. Just show you an image in a second. But at the same time, he had a political agenda which was very important at the time in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. My work so far on the biography of Pragnanda has relied on one important book by Hembada Gurung and Kudalanda Dal, which is about the only source one has really on the historical figure. I tried to also find other sources to relativize this rather hagiographic booklet by these two school teachers from Kiranti, who still had first-hand knowledge about him. The book was first published in the 60s, but then I have only access to the version of 1990. But it's quite an interesting text, and it poses also many questions. So this is another of the many statues which are coming up now all over the place. This one is in the Patlina area. In East Nepal, you find many other memorials. I could have a whole collection of these in Damak, and there's actually a Pragnanda highway going up from Damak to Tibin. But let me just also mention at this point already that Pragnanda was not an entirely novel figure in the East, because, as we will see, there are many parallels with another person from the Josmani sect, and that's an important aspect of his life story, that actually Pragnanda was initiated in the Josmani Parampara, and actually was very much affected by the religious ideas of this Sant or Bhakti movement, which also was very important in Eastern Nepal in the 19th century, and in a way paved the way, I would say, for the figure of Pragnanda. So that's why I put these two figures here side by side. But let me just give you some basic facts about the life for those who don't know much about Pragnanda. He was born in 1885 into a poor living family. His narrative describes how he already in early years had a certain signs of being a kind of Jnani, what they called, a kind of spiritual being. He had fits in the forest. He had what you could describe as typical shamanic initiation experiences. And because it said that early on he was getting these fits, especially when somebody ate meat or drank alcohol, especially meat was something which he just could not stand, and he would, in a way, then become possessed by the deity, which became his spiritual inspiration. Yes, so that was we don't know what exactly happened, but these are the stories in the Jirani. but what is more factual and it could be verified is that he eventually left the village in East Nepal, the village of Tuchinamba, close to Rabi in Ilan district, and because yes, he wanted to see more of the world, and he was not satisfied in living in the village, so he went to Darjeeling, selling some chicken there, making some money, and eventually worked as a porter, actually also in the Young Husband expedition. In 1903, 1904, he was one of the many porters and had some rather shocking experiences when some of his co-porters were swept away by avalanches and so on. It was a pretty hard job, but he was lucky to survive. Then later he tried to meet his brother, who had become a soldier in the Gorkha army, the British, and that brought him to Burma eventually. And in a strange kind of story of coincidences, he was eventually recruited. He didn't want to be recruited. He had no intention, but somehow he was taken to be because he had come on a train with this fellow traveler who had been a recruit, and so he had already benefited from the army, so he was seen as part of the transport, and so he was made a recruit and actually stayed there for quite some time. In the army, actually also went to France in the First World War later on, where he was shocked by the violence, and there are also little episodes about how he refused to shoot his enemies and just shot in the air because he could not see any reason during this work of a soldier. But this whole period of his life is still not very clear. There are still very many open questions, but finally, at least, he gets out of the army and goes back to India and travels around throughout the subcontinent as a sadhu, basically. On the way, he traveled all around to the south, to the north, but eventually came back to Nepal and decided to stay there and devote his life to the Limbu coast. Again, this is a turn of events which is not so clear in the biography of how actually this all came about, but at least by the 20s, when he was in his mid-30s, he devoted himself to the cause of the Limbu. And so this is a rather typical life story. I mean, if you read the story, it's quite nice to read, but it resonates with many other hagiographies. But it also shows that he was very much actually involved in the historical events of his time, and he had seen quite a bit of the world. He had been in Burma, and actually it was in Burma that he was initiated by Josmani. That's also explicitly stated in the biography that he met a kind of, not a disciple, but a disciple of Shashidhar, which was an early guru of the Josmani. So he was rather, when he came back eventually in Nepal, he roamed around, and here I'd like to show you this second, as far as I know, it's the only second photograph we have of Raghunanda. I cannot show you the whole one, but it's not quite fit, but you can see here in the middle, actually it's going to the left side, he's quite the central figure here, sitting with his malas, surrounded by his chelas, chela Buddha, as they say. I included the right side because you can see that there are also quite a few women in his following. And actually this gender aspect is also quite interesting because also it's often stressed that he was neither a man nor a woman. He was having this kind of, I don't know how to designate it, by non-sexual or bisexual. Anyway, he was somehow beyond, and he dressed, as you could see in the earlier pictures, he had these big malas usually, which only are worn by women. and also other ornaments which are typical of Limbu women, otherwise dressed in white always. So this is quite clear that he had here a rather aloof position, and that's also evident in other aspects. He was giving obligatory speeches, and there's a whole series of recorded or written down called the Shiva count. These are Akashvani's divinations which he gave. So he was a rather unique and rather, as I said, charismatic figure. The very few people which I did here who had still met him all agreed that he was a very imposing figure. Very authoritative in a way, but always at the same time very soft-spoken. This is the kind of impression you get. So I think I should move ahead. But at this point, I would just like to stress, and I won't elaborate on this, that actually, if you look at this kind of religious side of his personality, this kind of procession practices, this reminds you about other cases of Adivasi rebellion in India. For example, the well-known, well-described Santhal rebellion also was led by two persons who actually were possessed and were guided in their political activities by a spiritual being. So I think there are certain aspects which can be compared, but I won't do that here. I just want to stress again, let's see, come back to that later. Another important point is, if you look at the other kind of subaltern rebellions, which have been studied by members of the Subaltern Studies group, you could also see certain similarities in the way that the dominant order is kind of inverted. Especially you can see that in the Limbu language, which has been used by Prabhupada. I mean, he was probably, of course, a speaker of the Nepali language along in the Gorkha army, but he only spoke in Limbu when he returned to the Limbu. And that was, of course, very much a part of his message. So you could, following Limbu, call this a kind of semiotic trait, a reversal of the dominant discursive practices. Yes, so, but at the same time, and this is the whole ambivalence about it, which might be striking. And on the one hand, you have this very strong revivalist approach of reviving the Adivasi of the Janajati tradition of the Limbu and the Kiranti in general, but at the same time we have this reformist agenda, and this again is something you can also compare to other Indian movements of gurus like in the Bhakti tradition, like Kabir or more Pranat, the Krishna Pranami movement, which has been studied by Profan, which links to Nepal, or even people like Vivekananda, the Neo-Hindu movements, which also stress education, which try to find a new way of defining the religion, bringing in modern ideas which were important at the time. So, yes, so what I'm trying to say here is that Prabhupada was certainly a religious person. You cannot say that he was only an activist. He was clearly a thoroughly religious person, but at the same time had a rather radical program of political agenda. And so this is what I come to my next section. But to conclude here, I just want to compare him here with the current representative, Atmananda, whom I visited in Laruba a couple of years ago, and whom I found actually not as charismatic in a way. He's quite different as a character. I mean, as I already said, he's the Dharma Guru, which in a way, I'm not quite sure whether I understand why this distinction between Mahaguru and Dharma Guru, but in any case, he's married, and that's one aspect which is often stressed, that because Raghunanda was not married, but his reincarnation is married, and so there is a certain difference in these two generations. And also, I would say, whereas Raghunanda was, of course, also involved in the political aspect, coming to that in a minute. Also, Atmananda is, in a way, also seen as a political figure, and I think he's still very powerful at times of voting. That's what I hear. Anyway, this is a changing time. He's more, I would say, he's more moderate in a way, appealing to the middle classes, and so I think he's adapted to these requirements of his time. But I should stress again at this point that Atmananda, in spite of claiming the reincarnation, is not accepted as a reincarnation at all. There are many who respect Raghunanda, but not Atmananda, and there are also many Kirantis still nowadays who are followers of neither. So I should stress that in spite of the claim that they would present the Kirat Dharma as a whole, that's not really shared. So let me now come to my second point, the ethnic resistance and politics behind this movement. And I think that's something which is also widely known. I have not to go too much into details here, but it was important when Raghunanda was moving around, and he was always moving around. I should stress, he never stayed in one place. He had various places where he stayed. He had a kuti up in Silauti. He was in the hot season. He went down to Chukchinamba, his birthplace, in the cold season, but otherwise he was always on the move. And he was, I should have mentioned also the image I showed earlier with his following, that was on one of his Himalayan pilgrimages when he went up to Kanchenjunga and really went into the upper altitudes. Nowadays you would say close to the base camp, but anyway, in the snowy areas, and he also liked to move around quite a bit. But let me come to his political agenda and the background. For one, he was, I think, a unifier, because he always spoke about the Kiranti. I think in the current context that's quite important. He never saw himself only as a leader of the Limbu. It was a Limbu, but he always saw himself as a leader of the Kiranti, Kiranti as a whole, and also among his Chela, there were quite a few Rai, and actually I have recently found a list of his main Chelas, and there were also some Tamang and Gurumang among them, so he had a large following, and the concept of Kiranti was in a way apparently rather broad. But let me come to his political agenda. I think it's generally known that he was very much fighting for the maintenance of the Kipat system, which was at the time in the 1930s a big issue. As you know, and I just refer to Rainer Kaplan's classical study on the indebtedness of Limbus in eastern Nepal, and their increasing dependence on Bamun or high-caste Sahus, which made them lose much of their land. This is a very...
We just lost power, so I think
okay. Yeah.
generation give up.
Okay, so important to stress that there was this meeting of the 10 Limbu, the 10 Limbu chiefs from the whole area, from the Tamil Portion, from the east and west. And at that meeting, which continued for several days, they decided basically, that was mentioned, practices which were costly. It was about giving up price practices, which are having a problematic level among the limbo, that there was more and more of a demand and accepting bright price, also partly dowry. But basically it was an attempt to cut down on expenses of the Chumlung Satyahangma Panth, which was the kind of decision which came out of this meeting. So yes, so this is a clear political agenda behind it. They want to get back Tibetan land and regain the control over Kirat area, the Wuhan and the territories. People, fellow Hindu, builds up this image there. So it's become somewhat of a pilgrimage place by now, but it's not, I think, that well known. So it's not really overrun by pilgrims, but it's an important place, and I think it will probably continue to become important in the future. Yes, now just come to these temples. So this is one Manghim, this is the one in Larumba, and the inside, this is something, I'm not sure how familiar you with this. These are typical Manghim shrines. It's not a murti, it's called Mujotlum in Limbu. But it's basically, I would call it, it's a pyramid structure, or it could be compared to a chaitya perhaps, but it's clearly not a murti because it's part, and here you see the Droshmani background, it's actually a Nirguna Bhakti shrine, which is abstract, which does not represent a particular divinity, even though that's something to be argued also, as I come to show in a second. So these are, in his lifetime, I mean in the Jivani, which exists by Nepal, there are I think 6 or 7 which have been built during the lifetime of Padmanabha himself, in 1949 up to 1949. But now I haven't really counted them, but now it's well over 100 which you find in eastern Nepal and also in Darjeeling. I think over there,
Sure.
Running out of time. Now this is, I think, a typical process. I don't have to go into details. That the appropriation of space in a way through temple building is something which kings in South Asia have done for centuries. So this is a rather typical process. That by this it's a sanctification of space, but also in a way a political signal. It's also a form of community making. This is an image I took during the major festival, which is the Janma Jayanti, the birthday celebrations in November, 25th November, 11th November, the 25th of this year, when the birthday is being celebrated, and here usually a big home fire is being done, which is also part of the ritual program. So community making is certainly also part of it, because all of these Manghim also have a place for fire sacrifice, and that always goes together. I just mentioned already that this has also across the border, and this just to illustrate this with this map. You can see that the heartland of Padmanabha's activity is here on the Nepal side, around you see Sirauti Hill, is central. Rabi, close to Rabi, is his birthplace. Larumba, where nowadays Atmananda is active, and also in Philip, there's also big Manghim, the Sumatlum on the Dada in Philip. But also you have followers just 2-3 weeks ago, when I went to Basfote, which is a small village just across the border from Nepal to India, belonging to Darjeeling, And there are several villages where you also find followers of the Satyahangma Panth. Also in Sombare, which is across the Rankin River here in Sikkim, on the Sikkim side, you find quite a few followers. And this shows also that even in Darjeeling Bazaar, where you did not find followers directly of Satyahangma, but you also find the Manhims. Here, it's not very old, completed in 2000, but it's on the Mahakal Hill, the central shrine in the center of Darjeeling. And here it's called Limbuhang Sarvajanik Manghim, and it's actually they call it a Yuma temple. And you see, so it's the same structure, the same shrine inside here, and you also see there's the picture of Pagunanda also inside this building, but it's not. I have to stress a Satyahangma shrine, at least by those who have designed it. It is for Yuma, and there things get a bit complicated because on the Indian side of the border, Yuma has become the central figure, and also this has spilled over in a way also from India back into Nepal. There's much of a debate going on there whether Yuma should also become a central figure in this. This is just yes, one aspect I want to stress here. But just to show about these political aspects of how this religion has developed, you all know that here in Kathmandu Valley there is also a Manghim in Hattiban, Sarno Hattiban, just outside the ring road, and there rather than in Darjeeling, where you have actually there's a Manghim, and another just beside this is a Kirat Kambu temple. So the Rai have a separate temple in Darjeeling, but here for the four different Kiranti communities. You have the pyramid, for the Limbu, you have the Chula, the three hearth stones for the Rai, and then there's also a shrine for the Sulbar and also for the Yaka. So this you see quite a different concept of on the Nepal side. So you see that's why the whole politics of temple building is not so unimportant. I will just now come, but I try to cut this short so we have enough time for discussion. The third point I want to stress, but maybe this is something I don't have to go in much detail here, is that in this movement of the Satyahangma Panth, the writing is important. It has the script use of the Srijanga or Kiranti script. It's important. There's a story also in the Jivani, in the biography of Pagunanda, that he discovered that script in 1941. But of course, we know that the script has already been propagated by Iman Singh Chemchong long before that, and it's not really clear how these events related. I'm quite sure that Pagunanda must have known about Chemchong's activities in Darjeeling, even though he doesn't refer to it. So we have this nice kind of discovery stories, how he discovered these letters in a cave, which is actually not impossible because the Srijanga script goes back to the 18th century. It was invented by this Sikkimese monk who was killed as a seditionist. So there are stories that he also had moved around and that he left some of his inscriptions, which probably or possibly have been then discovered by Pagunanda. Anyway, it was kind of topic at the time that this indigenous script of the Kiranti had to be revived, and it was used then also as part of the educational program. And this again, here I could also make reference to comparative, similar events in other parts of South Asia. Again, the Santals have a script. The Santal script has a rather similar story, where also the script is regarded as something not only instrumental, but it's something sacred, which is very much linked to the ancestral identity. Also among the Sora, you have even very similar stories about discoveries of the script in caves. So it's not something men have invented, but it's rather something which has been given from times beyond. So this is an important part until now, and this is the Kirat Samjik Mundum, which is printed in Damak, issued from Atmananda's followers in Laroba. This is, in a way, you could say, the Red Bible of the Satyahangma Panth, which you find also being used in the Indian context. But of course, this is only one version of the Mundum, and I should stress, and I'm happy that Bibi Angbong is here, who just brought out the Yaktung Samjik Mundum, which is a different version of the Mundum, which is not part of this line. So I maybe should just mention that the scripturalization of Fagunanda's words are still little studied, or almost not studied at all, because Fagunanda was himself speaking in Limbu, but as far as I know, he hardly wrote anything. He propagated the script, but as far as I know, there are no original writings, or very few perhaps letters. I think there must exist. But he preached, but there were his main chelas. Badrinanda was one, and Rana Doj another one. But actually also others who wrote down what he was saying and preaching, and also his oracles, his divinations have been written down. So there's a whole body of literature in Limbu script about him, about his preachings. But again, it's not a coherent source, so there's still much philological work waiting to be done on this. But I think I'll leave it at that point with stressing this importance of the script. Clearly, it's an important process which you also find in other areas, that an oral tradition is being converted into a written tradition. And so this is a process you can see here more or less in the making, because in the last decades you have seen a whole booming literature, not only religious literature, but ever since the Kiranti script was brought out, was also used, making use of the Unicode font. It became much easier to print books, and so you have now a very expensive literature in Limbu script, which is still, I think, also understudied, I would say. So I think I should come to a conclusion, or at least to some final statements. I think it became clear that that this is a complex movement. It's a we can describe it as a reform movement, but at the same time I have also described it as an ethnic religion, and so this brings out various different aspects. I think if you focus on the movement, this is something which shows it's rather something which is still incomplete, which is process, and I think that's very much the case, because many of the things are still on the move. There's still debates going on, which is the right text to use and which is the right rituals to follow. But on the other hand, it's also maybe that's mainly the self-representation. It's an ethnic religion, a new religion, even though that's also being debated. I think many of those followers would not say that it's new, because they rather see it as a long tradition. But as a scholar and as a researcher, I still think it's something which is in the making. And just to sum up my major points, I think one feature was, which I tried to point out, the charismatic guru, which has been important in this movement. That's one thing which also we find in many similar movements. And then the second point is that it's a political movement. It has a certain political agenda, even though it is also having a religious form, which is not a contradiction. Here, I think what is important is that it's also a form of community making. That nowadays, I think this movement, going back to Fagunanda, stresses the unity of Kiranti, which is very much different if you go to the Indian side of the border, because where actually, I should also stress that Fagunanda as a figure is very little known in India. You find these temples, which they are, and there's the Yumaism, the movement of Yuma, but it's not linked to Fagunanda, surprisingly, even though I think historically it can only be going back to Fagunanda, but somehow this has been erased, at least this is my suspicion. And so there are two different agendas behind that. And the third point, again, I should just mention that is the importance of the ethnic script, which stresses that this is something modern. It stresses the aspect of education, and also especially also girls' education, which has ever been since Fagunanda's time an important aspect, that girls should be treated equally to boys, also get education, and that's also very much still on the agenda of you hear sermons by Atmananda and others. So yes, so these are the major aspects, and I think it would be nice to hear your comments. As I said, it's an ambivalent movement in many ways. It has both these aspects of ethnic religion, which stresses rather the local, and after all, it's an ethnic religion, and I use that term because so far it is still a religion of the Rhine, limbo of the Kiranti. It's not a religion which anybody could follow. But on the other hand, you have this kind of universalist tendencies, and maybe it changes at some point into a more universal religion, because it has this modernizing aspects of becoming a modern and somewhat sanitized religion, which can also be practiced, for example, in the diaspora in England, in America, where, as far as I hear, it is also quite popular. So thank you for listening, and I think I should have seen also, it's my last. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Before I open the floor for discussion and comments and questions, I was just wondering, the group photo that you showed us, do you have a date for it approximately, and where it was taken, and also where did you find it?
Well, it's a good question. The date seems to be quite. I can say that it's given. I have it from a publication from Larumba. So I assume that it's in the possession of the Larumba people, because when I was in Fidin a few years ago for the Janma Jayanti celebrations, they actually displayed that as a kind of relatively new finding, because I think it was discovered maybe only a couple of years ago. And so they gave it a frame with malas and so on. And actually then they made also buttons with this new image, because so far you only had this one photograph, and now you had a second one, so now you have a new kind of media reproduction coming up through that. It's 1938, so it's a kind of peak time of this Himalayan Jatras. He did several to the Kanchenjunga area, but that was one of the major ones with all of these followers. So it's quite interesting.
So the location would be where?
They say it's Paktalung, which is one part of the Kanchenjunga area, but I'm not sure whether I can further locate it. But it's, from the environment, you see it must be somehow about 3,000-4,000 meters at least up there. But it's actually it's a photograph. I really think it should be studied by historians of photography, because
that's right.
Because actually, and maybe we talk about that later. I have no idea who took the photograph. It's a very a fairly good photograph. This one I just got recently from publication from Larumba, which is fairly high quality. So I will try to identify some of the chelas, because now I have very small biographies of chelas, of his major disciples. So some of them probably can be identified who survived him, and have been interviewed. There's a little booklet about chelas giving accounts by their life.
Devendra Packer is suggesting maybe some photographer from that studio, from Darjeeling, might have been invited to.
That could be, yeah, from Darjeeling, It must have been a professional photographer, because it's quite big.
That's what
Actually, I have it with me if anybody wants to see it in this publication. It's really.
Yeah, well, we can look at it later. It's here, this one. So it's fairly large. I mean, this old techniques where you have these huge plates, we have to carry up the cameras, the kgs. Yeah.
So अब यहाँको प्रश्न उत्तर, if you want to start, के अरे तपाईलाई नेपालीमा सोध्न मन छ भने नेपालीमा पनि सोध्नु होला, मलाई नेपाली बुझ्नुहुन्छ, आवश्यक पर्यो भने म अङ्ग्रेजीमा ट्रान्सलेट पनि गर्दिन्छु।
धन्यवाद मार्टिन सर, तपाईँको प्रेजेन्टेसन इन्ट्रेस्टिङ, धेरै कुरा त सिक्यो, एब्स्ट्र्याक्ट लेभलमा यस्तो कुरालाई कसरी हेर्ने भन्ने, तर त्यति क्लियर पनि भएन, र पनि मेरो मनमा लागेको एउटा सोच्छु, म नेपालीमै सोध्छु, किनभने नेपालीमा बोल्नु मलाई सजिलो लाग्छ। तपाईँको जुन एउटा इन द मेकिङ अफ प्रोसेसमै भएको कन्क्लुजनमा म एग्री गर्छु, तर अलिकति यो पोलिटिक्स अफ टेम्पल बिल्डिङ अथवा माङ बिल्डिङ यो त्यति इम्पोर्टेन्ट होइन। त्यो राइटिङ स्क्रिप्ट चाहिँ ओभरलिटीलाई टेक्चुअलिटीमा जुन अहिले लगिराखेको छ त्यो चाहिँ अझ बढी इम्पोर्टेन्ट जस्तो मैले बुझेँ। तर मलाई लाग्छ अब हाम्रो आफै रिफ्लेक्सन गर्दा पनि हामी अहिलेसम्म स्कुल पढ्दादेखि टेम्पल भिजिटदेखि साउथ एसियन कन्टेक्समा अरू स्कलरहरूले पनि लेखेको छ कि यो फिजिकलिटी स्ट्रक्चर्सको त्यो पोलिटिक्स टेम्पल बिल्डिङ नै भनौँ अहिले माङ बिल्डिङ र अनि त्यो उसको समयक्रम जुन फाल्गुनन्दले बाँचेको समयक्रम र त्यो उसको बायोग्राफी हेर्दाखेरि चाहिँ इभन रिचार्ज बर्गटकै तपाईँले धेरै टाइममा मोडर्नाइजिङ एस्पेक्ट्सको कुरा गर्नुभयो होइन। त्यो मोडर्नाइजेसनको इसेन्सियलाइजेसन इटसेल्फ आफै एउटामा धेरै त्यो टेम्पल बिल्डिङको पोलिटिक्स देखिन्छ। रिचार्ज बर्गरले पनि त्यस्तै भनेको छ भनेदेखि यो खालको ओरिएन्टेसनबाट नै धेरै, चाहे त्यो लिम्बू होस्, चाहे अरू किराँत होस्, चाहे अरू होल सुप्रा नेपाली होस्, कुनै न कुनै हिसाबले त्यो खालको ओरिएन्टेसन उसँग इम्बडिड छ। त्यही कारणले यो एकदम यो पोलिटिक्स रिलिजियस इथनिक सँगसँगै त्यो पोलिटिक्स त्यत्तिकै इन्टरमिङ्गल्ड होला, त्यसलाई कसरी हेर्ने मेरो चाहिँ त्यो हो। मैले कतिको कम्प्लिमेन्ट। थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच।
I'm not sure how I would translate that, sorry.
Well, I'm not sure whether I agree that, I mean, I think the temple building is an important aspect. And actually I found it more and more important the more I also see what's happening on the Indian side. And that's one aspect I've been more and more interested in recent times, since I've been traveling to Sikkim and Darjeeling. And I found that it seems very similar at first sight, but when you start looking at the things and talking to people, you have the same manhim almost, but there it's Yuma. And I think this is, the more you get into that, this whole discussion about Yumaism brings you straight into politics about reservation policies, because I think the background is the big division between Limbus and Rai on the Indian side, because here in Nepal there's also certain division, but on the other hand you still have a rather strong unity of Kiranti identity, whereas on the Indian side this does not exist. You have the terms Kiranti, but it's Kiranti Yaka, Kirat Kambu Rai organization, Kirat Limbu, and as you know, the Limbu in Sikkim did not agree and let the Rai use the Limbus of the Kiranti script. They call it Limbu script because Sri Janga was a Limbu, and they have forbidden the Rai people to use that script, which here is not an issue at all. So you see, and this is very much linked to the fact that on the Indian side, the Limbu have achieved scheduled tribe status, whereas the Rai have not, and they're still trying to get scheduled tribe status, but so far they have not succeeded. So this brings a big divide between Limbu and Rai, which also affects, again, religion. So there's not a Kiranti religion. So they have humanism, which again is an entirely Limbu concept, which a deity from the Limbu pantheon, which is not known among the Rai, at least under this name. So I think it's important to see these aspects. And the temple building, of course, yeah, it's only one aspect. I'm sure it's not the main. One cannot reduce it to this temple building activities, because I think also equally important is the politics of book publications and the different mundums which exist. Because I should have mentioned there used to be the Samjik mundum published in Larumba, but there's also a Chamchik mundum, which is derived not from the Badrinanda line. I mean, I said the major chelas were Badrinanda and Ranadoj. So Badrinanda was the chela who built up Atmananda, basically. He more or less discovered Atmananda as a small boy and made him into the successor of Adunanda. Whereas Ranadoj is also an equally intellectually very productive chela, and he produced a different line of texts which are not included in the Red Book. So we have quite a division again of creeds, which I also see is quite important and maybe much more important than the temple building.
मेरो एउटा सामान्य प्रश्न चाहिँ के भने यो शशिधर स्वामी चाहिँ पश्चिम सन्त परम्पराको शशिधर मरासिनी जो हुनुहुन्छ, जो पश्चिममा बिलोङ गर्नुहुन्छ, जुन मेरो जिल्लाको हो होइन। तर त्यो उहाँले यो अलि रिलेट हुन्छ कि हुँदैन म सोधिहाल्छु। त्यो सन्त परम्परा चाहिँ पश्चिममा एकदम साँगुरो, पूर्वतिर फैलिँदै अब दार्जिलिङसम्म जाँदाखेरि एकदम फराकिलो छ क्या। पश्चिमको जनजाति समुदायमा त्यसले चाहिँ खासै इम्प्याक्ट गरेको छैन, पूर्वमा चाहिँ किन गरे होला भन्ने मेरो एउटा सामान्य जिज्ञासा। अनि यो सन्त परम्परामा हिँडिरहेका जो मान्छेहरू छन्, उनीहरूले पनि यो मैले अहिले संस्कृत पाठशालाको बारेमा काम गरिरहेको हुनाले कतै संस्कृत पाठशालाहरू खोलेको अथवा उनीहरूले संस्कृत पढाएको कुराहरू तपाईँले केही पाउनुभएको थियो कि?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, the whole Josmani aspect is also still little studied. I think I actually just found also Indian publications on the Josmani, because here I've so far only came across the study by Jadagar Sharma, Josmani Satyahangma, which is of course now also more than 50 years old. But there's also the study by Novakishore Rai and Netamani Rai, who kind of field study on contemporary, the contemporary situation, and there it's quite clear that yes, somehow it used also to be strong in the West, but it moved from, I mean, basically Shashidhar was, I think, in the Garhwal, Kumaon area, and then his successors more or less moved further and further to the east. And the question why there's still so many in the east, but not in the west, is still somewhat of a puzzle. But I think it might be related to the fact that, but I'm not quite sure, but one aspect is important, that after Lakantapa was executed, after his attempt to build this kingdom of and one of the main escape from eastern Nepal. He was born in Tikal, they say. He went across border and stayed in Rangul and later in Geling, where there's still a large following. His samadhi is in Geling, on the Sikkim side. And it's quite clear that after that also many others followed. It might be that this due to this process also the Western part, because they were no longer seen as a peaceful bhakti religion, but rather as a seditious, dangerous sectarian tradition. I'm not sure whether this is one of the reasons, but at least in the East, that was the reason why you still, even now, there are very few left.
Why don't you ask in English?
Sorry. No, the Limbu scholars here, right? And then the very renowned scholars like Martin. I was just wondering, Joshmani, Falgunanda, is he social movement people, social mover, improvement, no? Social
Reforms, yeah.
or kind of religion?
Well, that was my question. Yes, in a way.
Because coming from the same as Guru, with this Falgunanda, a lot of changes made among the new community. I mean, like they stopped drinking, and a lot of improvement, especially the kind of things. Now, new Matwali, you know what is new Matwali? They've started selling the land to this Limbu community who have started Falgunanda kind of following. So
they brought it back.
Yeah, so that way I see big changes, impact. But coming back to real, if it is a religion, then I would like to ask our friends here, what is the identity of community? If we remember the Vedangba is the real kind of group. Right? They are
priests or ritual specialists.
So I have some confusion on which one to follow. Follow the Vedangba or Falgunanda, what to do?
Well, that's a good question, because actually this temple I showed earlier, the one photograph I've taken in Darjeeling on the Mahakal hill, which looks like a Falgunanda Satyahangma Manhim. Actually, the priest is a Vedangma. So he's a traditionalist, traditional Limbu priest. And
Sorry.
am I wrong or?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sorry. म पनि सत्याहाङ्मा पन्थी हो. सो हाम्रो फाल्गुनन्दको जन्ती अनुयायी हुनुहुन्छ. माङ्निङमा चाहिँ हाम्रो फेदाङ्बा हुँदैन कि सेवा सावा हुन्छ. उहाँले चाहिँ सेवा सावा हुन्छ. देन उहाँले चाहिँ त्यो बुक अघि उहाँले देखाइसक्नु भएको छ पिक्चरमा सामजिक मुन्दुम भनेर. हो त्यही पढेर चाहिँ अनि त्यो अनुसार चाहिँ पूजा गर्ने गरिन्छ.
यो ठिक हो. तर in Nepal, you're right, it's a seva sava for the Satyahangma Manhim.
Yeah.
It's clear that this is to be done not by a Vedangma, but by a follower of Falgunanda. And that's also why when I went to Banskote, where there's a whole community of Satyahangma followers, they said, no, this is not a real Manhim. This is a Yuma temple. For them, it's not a shrine to go to, because for them it's somewhat polluted, even because of Vedangma. He practices blood sacrifice. He does the traditional rituals of the Limbu community, and that does not go together with the Satyahangma. So you see again that this somehow an ambivalent situation there. But yes, it's important to stress that there is still. I think still the majority of Kiranti, also not only Limbu but also Rai, still follow their traditional practices. If you go to the villages, I mean, during Udauli, the major rituals, it does not take place without necessary jar, which is being strewn, and certain blood sacrifices. It's still very much part of the widespread traditional practices. The Satyahangma movement is still somewhat of a marginal movement, but I think
it represents itself as the major new religion, or the kind of revised or reformed religion, which should be followed by everybody else. So there is also a certain hierarchy. There's still followers of the Satyahangma Panth. They, in a way, look down upon the villagers who have not, in a way, found the new message yet, so to say.
So,
यो एउटा त यहाँ छ यो सत्यहङ्गामा पन्थ छ अनि सरको यो बायोग्राफीमा टिबेटियन एन्ड बुद्धिस्ट स्टडिजको प्रोफेसरको रूपमा देखाएको छ त्यो पन्थ र रिलिजनको बिचमा के डिफरेन्स हुन्छ भनेर बताइदिनु नम्बर 1 दोस्रो विषय के छ भने यो मेन टिचिङ जो छ यो फागुनन्दाजीको उहाँको पोइन्टेड के छ भने तेस्रो के छ भने बुद्धिज्म नेपालमा त 3000
यसो गरौँ न अरुको पनि पारा चाहियो हैन अहिले दुईटा मात्र सोधौँ ल Did you get these two questions?
Well, the first one about Panth and religion, I think that was clear. Well, actually, both is being used. I mean, sometimes it's called Kirat Dharma also. I mean, Dharma is a translation of religion. You find that too. But actually, mostly, I mean, among the Satyahangma followers, it's seen as a Panth. Like Kabir Panth. In some of the villages, actually, you have in the Chintang area where I worked, you also had Kabir Panthis, and it shows that in the 19th century there were quite a few different Sant traditions which were, so to say, around and could be followed. It was not only the Drusmani; they also had competitors, you could say. So that's why I think the term Panth is used, because it's seen as a path one has to follow, and it's the concept of dharma in this modern concept as religion is not always used. But in the context of Kirat Dharma, I haven't found Kirat Panth. So Kirat religion that exists as a concept, I would say.
दोस्रो कुरा के थियो फेरि एकचोटि भन्नु
जो भन्दा एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट मैले बिर्सिसकेको छु यो म
हैन अहिले दोस्रो के सोध्नु भएको
थियो टिचिङ पिरियड एकदम इम्पोर्टेन्ट के छ भने नेपालमा एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट छ सबैलाई काम लाग्छ नेपालमा बुद्धिज्म त 3000 वर्षदेखि प्र्याक्टिस भएको हो मैले भर्खर यो अनलाइन पनि हेरेँ क्लोज टु बुद्धिज्मकै छ उहाँको टिचिङ लगभग त बुद्धिज्म त प्र्याक्टिस भइरहेको त उहाँले आफै छुट्टै त्यहाँ पन्थको रूपमा किन विकास गर्नु पर्यो होला के सिनारियो र केले उनलाई इन्स्पायर गर्यो छुट्टै भनेर प्र्याक्टिस बुद्धिज्म भन्दा छुट्टै भनेर त्यसमा के यहाँको स्टडी छ
So did I understand? So you asking why they're not following Buddhism rather than?
Yes, Buddhism had been practicing from 3,000 years before in Nepal. Why did he discover his own path? What was the reason behind that and scenario? What did you do?
Yes, it's an interesting question. I mean, because considering that Buddhism has been around for much longer in this area, and actually Sri Janga was a Buddhist monk. So as far as we know, he was educated. Must have been fluent in Tibetan and in reading, writing Tibetan, which apparently also inspired his script to some degree. So yes, it could have. One could argue that why did not the Limbu, or especially those further to the east, decide to convert, adopt the Buddhist religion? But apparently, even in the 18th century, I mean, persons like Sri Janga did not want to do that, but rather return to their own religion. And it was, in a way, you can see him as an early revivalist, because he also tried to go back to his Limbu tradition and say, no, we have our own tradition, and that's basically the argument nowadays, that the Limbu are proud of their ancestral heritage and they are not keen to adopt a different religion, and that's of course raises the question why they adopted the Josmani creed, which again you could argue is a Hindu religion, and that's what I find more puzzling actually, is that that Fagunanda in a way was already you could say Hinduized to quite some degree, but eventually I don't think that I'm not sure whether he really continued to consider himself initiated into the Josmani tradition, because what he did later on was something quite different, going back to the Limbu script yes, stressing the Janajati tradition of the Limbu rather than the Josmani, who are of course much more generalized as a South Asian tradition and have a followership all over the subcontinent. But in a way, if you look more closely at the religious ideas, I think you will find that actually quite a few of the Josmani concepts have entered into his thinking, even though the language was different. So one has to be clear about the difference of language and difference of ideas. And often, I mean, many people ask, well, he looks like a Hindu head. You see the big trishul he has, of the big photograph. The first, mostly seen photograph is mainly him with a big golden trishul, and also the home sacrifice and many of these other symbolic actions, the sacredness of the fire and so on, very much remind you of Hindu concepts. So one is in a way puzzled how this movement could eventually be a kind of anti-Hindu movement, because it was against the Ranas, and in a way it was also against the dominant religion in the kingdom of Nepal in the 1920s. So yes, it's puzzling in many ways.
You said that there's not much on the source to write about Fagunanda's life for the 1920s and the 30s. But now it's quite clear that the last 25 years of his life coincided with an increase in publications, both from inside Nepal and from the greater Darjeeling area. So could these publications be actually accessed as possible sources? It's entirely possible that people actually wrote about him from Darjeeling. And unlike in the 1990s, when I was working on stuff related to Darjeeling, 30 years later, we now have pretty complete archives of these publications now available in Kathmandu. So that's point one. The second is there's a whole bunch of people who are now being researched by several people in this room who spent considerable amount of their life, several years in India during the same period. So the 1920s, so let's say post-World War I. What's your guess about what's happening to these individuals while they are traveling or working or doing anything else in India, that when they eventually return to Nepal in the late 1920s or the 1930s, they become reformers? And I think this is now a puzzle that is a collective puzzle. I mean, Devan has just written a long chapter on Mananda Sapota, who could be considered an education reformer. His actual work only happens much later, but this is a guy who comes back to Nepal in the 1930s after spending after spending the first 4 decades of his life in India. So have you thought about this?
Yeah, well, I'm happy about any suggestions. If I find more sources, that could be an interesting line to follow. But so far, I haven't really found, even in Darjeeling, that was one of the reasons I went there. When I was in Rangpur, for example, where there's this concentration of those money still, and I was surprised that they did not know much about Kathmandu, because even though there is so much similarity in their story, you know, they both being this, especially Gaenszle, who's most studied among these gurus of the Josmani. He was traveling also around, you know, going from village to village, but that was just one generation earlier, and so I thought, well, at least maybe in the next generation they must have also seen him. Maybe he was still perceived perhaps as a Josmani, because at least in the earlier times. But so far, no, I'm disappointed myself that I couldn't find any written sources yet. But I'm not hopeless. I'm sure there must be descriptions, or at least on this side. And also, I mean, talk about sources. I think since there also must be written documents on the Nepal side in the National Archives, because there was this event that he was held up by the Barahakim in Dankuta, and he was charged with sedition. You know, there were complaints by some Brahmins and some on Kanchanagiri. So I'm not sure. I have to check with the Heidelberg archive or other archives about legal documents, because somehow that must have left its trace. He was accused of being a seditionist, and there was, I mean, I'm not sure whether it was a real trial, formal trial, but the Barahakim asked him, you know, what is true about this. And then the story in the Jivani is that he just sat there with his very soft-spoken voice, so as a seeing himself, presenting himself as a holy man, and just saying, well, look at me, Pusle jockey like me can be a seditionist, and then even the Barahakim said, well, no, who said that? You know, where's the plaintiff? Because apparently all these accusations went up in smoke. That at least is a story in the book. I'm not sure whether that's what's actually happened. But yes, I'm sure there must be more legal documents, and anybody can give me a hint, I will be happy about that. Yeah.
So the second part of my question was basically hinting at all.
Excuse me, sir. हामीले चाहिँ क्वेशन सोध्नु नपाउने सर?
मैले अघि सोधेको प्रश्नको जवाब नआएर सोध्दैछु।
हाम्रो पनि क्वेशन भारी भारी छ सर।
5 बजेसम्म बस्न मिल्छ। So I was just hinting. Basically, there is a whole cohort of people who have experience of traveling and being exposed to all kinds of social reform activities in the Indian side, that whose lives coincide almost year by year for Phalgunanda. So, are you actually suggesting some line of analysis regarding what is that experience, that when they come back to Nepal, they become reformers?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's still a big question mark. I mean, the whole formative period, basically between 1905 and 1920, there's still a big gap. I mean, well, there was the army years, which I was hoping also maybe to try to trace a bit more with the archives in the UK. On the Gorkha army, but I haven't found out much. I think we could trace down the regiment that he was actually in France, because there was only one regiment which had come from Burma, which went eventually to France. But there's hardly any indication otherwise, you know, where exactly he was, because it was not only a short period. It was must have been at least several months in Europe. But that's all very much vague. And then also especially then after the return to India, so it must have been in 1918. So for several years he was traveling throughout the subcontinent, and there I'm actually quite sure that in this time he met a lot of people who gave him ideas about reform. Even I was wondering whether even people like Gandhi might have had an effect on him. I mean, Satya, a very important concept, of course, in Gandhi's philosophy. became Satyahangma, this kind of combination of Satya, the Sanskrit term for truth, and then Hangma, which means queen in the Limbu language. So in a way, that's all a puzzle. I have no traces at all where these ideas came from. I think he must have been traveled with sadhu, with Shaiva or Ramanandi sadhus, whatever, which is of course fairly easy. You can travel quite easily, at least in those days, without having to worry too much about making a living, because you could just go from one mat to another and you would always get something to eat as a sadhu. So in those years he must have learned a lot, I think. But what exactly and whom he met, there's not much.
Can I take 2 more questions?
Well, you are the moderator, but I think the ladies should also have a chance.
So मैले एउटा क्वेसन सोध्न चाहेको छु के भने हैन जो माग्नु फाल्नु कोबाट प्रभावित हुनुभयो भन्ने कुरामा चाहिँ एकदमै धेरै चर्चा भयो जस्तो लाग्यो हैन तर माग्नु फाल्नु नन्दले चाहिँ लिम्बू समाजमा चाहिँ के परिवर्तन ल्याउनु भयो र अहिले त्यसको अवस्था चाहिँ के छ भन्ने चाहिँ स्टडीमा आयो जस्तो मलाई लाग्यो है र अहिले करेन्ट सिनारियोमा चाहिँ इस्टर्न नेपालमा माग्नु फाल्नु नन्दले जुन समाज सुधारको एउटा कदम चाल्नुभएको थियो हैन त्यसले चाहिँ लिम्बू कम्युनिटीलाई चाहिँ के चाहिँ इम्प्याक्ट पार्यो र त्यसै सोसियलदेखि लिएर हिस्टोरिकलसँग चेन्जेस चाहिँ के भयो भन्ने कुरा छलफलको विषयमा हुनुपर्ने हो कि र ज्ञान दिलदास जस्तो जो इन्फ्लुएन्सर जो पनि हुनसक्छ नि होइन सर एउटा गुड ह्युमन बिङ हुनुको लागि होइन थुप्रैजना गुरुहरू चाहिन्छ हामी किन त्यहाँनिर अड्किरहेछौँ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ मेरो मेन क्वेसन हो होइन र यदि सत्यहाङ्मा पन्थ भन्ने सत्यहाङ्मा कसरी आयो भने त्यसको हिस्ट्री पनि केलाउनु पर्यो सर त्यसको लागि त महागुरुले जुन बेला चाहिँ राणाहरूले चाहिँ दरबारमा बोलाएका थिए आइडेन्टिटी माग गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ म सत्य बोल्ने भएको भएर म सत्यको कुरा गर्छु भन्ने क्रममा उहाँलाई नाम भिराइएको यो पन्थको नाममा त हामीले भिराएको न हो दिस इज नट सत्यहाङ्मा पन्थ जसले नाम भिरायो यो पनि तपाईँ हामीले नै भिराएको हो यो खासमा पन्थ पनि होइन कि यसमा त खासमा सत्यहाङ्मा चाहिँ के महागुरु फाल्गु नन्दलाई चाहिँ कसरी आइडेन्टिफाई गर्ने त भन्दाखेरि सत्य बोल्ने मान्छे हो म भन्दाखेरि राणाहरूले यो त सत्य कुरा बोल्ने रहेछ भन्ने हिसाबबाट होइन पछिबाट समाजले कसरी उहाँलाई बुझ्ने त भन्दाखेरि सत्यहाङ्मा भनेको मात्र यो पन्थ भनेर जुन भिराइएको छ यसमा मेरो विमति छ सर
I'm not sure whether I understood all the points, but you're stressing the importance of Satya, as you also said, and the fact that Raghunath was also much respected at the court in Kathmandu, and that was the reason why he was eventually not seen as a seditionist, because I think there was for a long time there was a certain nervousness in the government about what's going on in the East. And the East always was a bit of a troubled area, because the Limbu and Kiranti were always seen as kind of warriors, some people who could easily rise against the government. But eventually Raghunath convinced the ruling powers that he's not a seditionist, and that actually he's and that's also how he presented himself, that he's bringing peace and actually unity, and I think that's exactly one of the achievements was exactly that he brought a certain unity to the Kiranti people, because at that time, I mean, always it's been stressed that the Kiranti, especially the Rai, Jati Rai, Utikura, they always tending to differentiate themselves. There's not unity at all, even among one of these, among the Rai themselves, and not even less among the Kiranti as a whole. So I think that was really an achievement, which has an effect until the present. So he saw himself, as a moral person, who also, and that's why I think it's quite possible that he was inspired by Gandhi, because Satya, to speak the truth, for him that was the important thing, speaking the truth, eating the truth. So Satya Kale meant basically eating the right things, and doing the right things, also the habits, the behavior. All this is very much part of that religion. That's why eventually, I mean, that is another similarity with the Josmani, because for a long time the Josmani also were very much respected at the royal court. I mean, Rana Bahadur Shah, as it is known, was a follower of the Josmani, and so up to this Lakantapa incident, the Josmani were very well received at the royal court. So in a way, that was also repeated then by Kathmandu. But I'm sure that, I mean, it's also true that he seemed to have enemies, and that's coming out in that story about this Kanchanagiri who complained, who submitted a complaint against him, accusation. And it's also not so clear what actually is behind that. It seems there were Brahmins not happy about what's going on. And also this temple building activity actually was also not uncontroversial there. I think that was one of the issues which was not seen benevolently by the Brahmins, because I'm not sure why, because it implied raising money, and maybe he also raised money from other members of the community. So I'm not sure really what was behind it, but there were some tensions as well. But if you read the descriptions, he was Raghunanda apparently was always a very diplomatic person. There was, for example, one story in the biography about an argument with the Chitre Lama, with the Lama in Darjeeling, actually on the Darjeeling side, and the Lama also accused him of being somehow a fake sadhu or something like that. And eventually, it turns out that it's all a misunderstanding, and the Lama eventually goes down and shows him all his respect. So he must have been a very, very gentle and very diplomatic person, and I think that is part of the creed which is behind it. So it was more than just a social reform. You could say it was also a moral reform, but I'm not sure whether this answers the question.
नमस्ते म ड्राइभ थिएँ म बसेरै सोध्छु ल मेरो क्वेसन चाहिँ कस्तो भने अब त्यो किरात रिलिजियन भनेर 3.2 अघि स्ट्याटिस्टिक्स देखाउनु भयो नि त्यो चाहिँ अब नर्मली लिम्बू र राईहरूले चाहिँ के धर्म हो भन्दा अब हामी त हाम्रो चाहिँ ठ्याक्कै यो धर्म भन्ने हुँदैन नि त मौलिक हिसाबले जानेहरूले अनि हामी किराती हो भन्ने हिसाबले चाहिँ उनीहरूले किरात धर्म भनेको हुन्छ र अब यो चाहिँ तपाईले मात्रै हैन तपाईले अघि पनि भन्नुभएको थियो यसमा चाहिँ मेरो क्वेशन चाहिँ फाल्गुनन्दको फलोवरहरूलाई भेट्दै गर्दा उहाँको नन फलोवरहरूलाई पनि भेट्नु भयो कि भएन किनभने अहिले चाहिँ राईहरूको बारेमा चाहिँ मलाई थाहा छैन तर लिम्बू कम्युनिटीमा चाहिँ एक खालको कन्फ्लिक्ट आइरहेको छ हैन त्यो एउटा ग्रुपले चाहिँ रिफर्मरको रूपमा हेर्छ भने अर्को ग्रुपले चाहिँ एबोलिसरको रूपमा हेर्छ के एबोलिसर भनेको उनले चाहिँ कतिपय मौलिक ओरिजिनल कल्चरल प्र्याक्टिसेसहरू चाहिँ उसको कारणले चाहिँ हराइराखेको छ जस्तै कि मान्छे मर्यो भने चाहिँ लिम्बूहरुकोमा न्याग्रा बजाउने चलन छ भने चाहिँ फाल्गुनन्दको फलोवरहरूले चाहिँ शंख फुक्छ हैन अनि बिहेहरुमा चाहिँ हाम्रो फेदाङमाले लगन गरिदिन्छ भने उहाँहरूले चाहिँ चरु बाल्नु हुन्छ हैन जुन चाहिँ त्यो पहिलादेखि प्र्याक्टिस हुँदै गएको चाहिँ त्यो हराइराखेको छ के त्यसैले मेरो क्वेशन चाहिँ त्यो दुईटा बीचको फलोवर र नन फलोवर बीचको कन्फ्लिक्ट के फिल गर्नु भयो कि भएन
Yes, well, that's an important point, and I already indicated about this these divisions within the community. And actually, I think it's roughly three groups. There are those who follow the line of Atmananda, who claims to be the kind of rightful succession and reincarnation of Fagunanda. But then there are also followers of Fagunanda, but not in a formal manner. So they are not initiated, they are not going through these trainings as Seva Sabha, which we have now also in the official line of in Larumba, where you can become a Seva Sabha, then you can do certain rituals. there are also those who respect Atmananda, Falgunanda, and follow his creed, which basically means following the dietary restrictions and doing certain rituals. But then, as I said, there's the third group, which is neither of these, but still follows the traditional religion. And I think that's, in a way, we have in many villages, that's really creating a division which does exist. And I think the traditionalists probably are still quite clearly the largest group. But still, yes, it's a process, and I'm not sure how it will further develop in the next years to come. But I think it's very much an urban phenomenon that you have this reformed religion, and I mean it does make sense, especially in the diaspora, where it's actually quite difficult to practice blood sacrifices, and you know, if you do it in England, I think you have to get permission from a butcher or something like that. If you want to sacrifice a pig, for example, you can't just do it in your home. It requires certain expertise and so on. So I mean, in this context, it's quite understandable that that one goes for a rather reformed religion. But also in other contexts, I think it has had an impact.
हामी usually 4:30 मा कुरा राख्छौँ अहिले 4:45 बज्यो so I'm going to stop the official seminar, but if Martin is willing, please talk to him informally after the event. So thank you, Martin, for his wonderful presentation and discussion.
Thank you for your questions. Yes, it was very inspiring. And yes, feel free to ask me further questions.